You'll remember that Henry married Annie. Annie was a neighbor girl and went to school with Henry. Annie's father, Charles Lindsay, is shown in blue in the first column. Charles died, and Annie's mother, Ruth Lindsay, appears in columns 2 and 3. Annie's father's death may have had something to do with initiating why she and Henry decided to wed that year. Joseph Birchfield's widow, Rachel, married Jacob Ailey in the spring of 1840, less than a year after Joseph's death. Women had to remarry soon after becoming widowed because that being married was their means of support. She married Jacob Ailey in the spring of 1840 and received over 200 acres as the 1/3 dower laid off to her. That tells you something about the size of the properties that Joseph Birchfield had to his estate. As a widow, she too had a need to marry quickly. And Rachel appears in black in all 3 columns. I have her listed, widow Rachel, next to Jacob's name. And there is William Birchfield, born 1815 in bold black. He was Rachel's legal stepson and Mary's extra-legal stepson. William Russell, 2 names below Alexander's in the first column, was one of the witnesses to Henry Parrott's 1853 will. Joseph Birchfield's second wife, Rachel, was a Russell prior to her marriage, and likely she was a sister to William Russell. As you can see, Mary Gann and her sons lived within a proverbial shouting distance of the interwoven Birchfield and Gann families in this small school district. And we do know this is a small area. Children used to have to get themselves to school by themselves, and it had to be within walking distance. These school censuses support, in correlation with the federal population censuses, a conclusion that Mary Gann's 2 younger sons were named William and Henry, and that she had a 5th son whose identity remains to be discovered. By all appearances, the family pulled together with shared responsibility for the youngest child still in school. Mama may have been 2 houses down the road with Henry, but who knows but what initially those sons took their meals at Henry's house, since she'd be cooking for him anyway. Though I think we might also wonder where there could have been some eagerness on their parts to get married soon, so they would have a woman to look after them in their own home. It is, of course, very possible that the youngest boy did stay with Mary at Henry's house, but was counted at the Gann household, since Henry had no school-aged children of his own at that time. He was 25 or so years older than Mary. Let's pick up with William Gann here and follow him on out and see what became of him. We know he was still in Jefferson County in November 1847 when he witnessed the deed for Henry of the 50 acres that adjoined their mother's land. But just over 2 years later, by 1850, William and wife Elizabeth and their 3 children are in Bradley County, which is 1 county east of where we are sitting today. Age 31 gives William a birth year of 1819, which compares very favorably to that 1820 birth year from the 1830 and 1840 censuses that we can deduce. They have children, Mahala, George A., and look at this, Henry E. Now, would a son of Mary Gann possibly name children after older brothers? Yeah. Yes. We have George here and we have Henry. Now, I wish we knew what those middle initials stood for, because that A right there certainly could be an Adam or an Alfred for my ancestor. Let us remember that, well, no, let us not remember anything. Let us move on to something else. Here in 1850, who else was living in Bradley County at this time? George, yeah, George Daniel was. George Daniel, Mary's oldest son. So William, if he is Mary's son, has moved from Jefferson County between 1847 and 1850. He has moved to Bradley County, whichever direction is east from here. And so brothers often move to settle near each other, correct? In 1850, my second great-grandfather, Adam Alfred Gann, and David's, was right here in Hamilton County. So, and these are adjoining counties. They're close to each other. George Daniel Gann is actually found 11 pages away from Henry on the census, but geographically, he and William could have lived quite close to each other. I'm not going to return to that slide, but the school censuses that I showed you in that 1840-41 school year, there's a Wade H. Newman who appears successively. And I mapped all of those people back to the censuses and decided, oh, I don't need that slide. But Wade H. Newman actually appears 7 pages over from Mary Gann in the census, but he's in the same school district. You know, those roads, and children would ride across each other's fields. Fencing was not common in that day at that time other than rock fences. And so people, even though they appear many pages distant from each other on the census, could actually live within a very close physical geographical distance to each other. George, we see here, is age 35, which gives him a correct birth year of 1850. He appears to have done well for himself because, look, he's got $800 worth of real estate. George Daniel married prior to Joseph Birchfield's death, so it may be that Joseph Birchfield set him up with a little get-started kind of nest egg that he was able to keep using as he was married. Now, oddly, George's wife, Margaret Allen, is enumerated last in the list, and we don't really understand how that came to be. But Margaret is going to die. Margaret will soon die, and George Daniel is going to marry a second wife, Keziah Frazier. Lewis, here's a Frazier for you, okay? I know that you were working on Fraziers. And he marries Keziah Frazier in Bradley County in 1852. By 1860, George and his family have relocated to Christian County, Missouri, which is in the southwest corner of Missouri. In 1850, Henry Gann is still living in Jefferson County. He is with his wife Anna and daughters Louisa and Elizabeth. He is 25 years of age, which squares perfectly with the 1830 and 1840 censuses and to his gravestone. It doesn't happen often that a person's age follows them exactly through censuses, but Henry seems to have always known exactly how old he was. Here you see Anna and her 3 Lindsay siblings who lived with her in Henry. Henry owns $200 worth of real estate, which could be the 50 acres he bought from Joe Parrott in 1847, or more likely, it's the land that Annie inherited from her family's estate. In July 1851, Henry and Anna and Charles Lindsay sold 210 acres to Eli Fox. Land typically sold for $1 an acre. Isn't that a dream? Anna is described in that deed as the femme covert. So that legal term, by that legal term, we know that the land that came into Henry's possession came via Annie's family. The sale of that land gave Henry a sizable amount of cash to be able to leave Jefferson County and move to Cole County, Missouri, which is situated, it's the same county as the state capital, right in the middle of Missouri. Henry is said by one researcher to appear on the 1856 tax rolls of Cole County, but I've not been able to confirm that. A local history of the Renfro family, into which Henry and Annie's daughter Louisa Miranda, and Miranda is a form of the name Mary, says that Henry and Anna went to Cole County by steamboat in 1856. There is a rather large river that connects. One of the affiants in Annie's widow's application says that he met Henry in 1856 and did farm work for him for several years after that. What we do know for sure is that Henry Gann said of Cole County patented 40 acres there in 1857. And here is his land patent, and it too is under the Gann spelling. Henry soon, excuse me, Henry soon acquired his neighbor Jacob Colvin's 80 acres, and Henry established a Gann family cemetery on that property. I have it circled. You see where the little arrows are for the cemetery on that map? And Jacob Colvin obtained that patent in what, 37? I can't quite see it from here. Well, no, Henry got it in 57, but Jacob had been there quite a long time.
37.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, this cemetery is where Henry and Annie and other family members are buried. There are also some unmarked graves there. As late as 1928, it was still called Gann Cemetery, and we know that because it's named that on the death certificates of some of Henry's descendants who were buried there. But now it's called the Stone Cemetery because in 1882, Annie quitclaimed 100 acres of her 300 that she and Henry owned to their youngest daughter, Sally Ann, who married John W. Stone. When they sold the farm, the cemetery thereafter started being called Stone Cemetery because they were the most recent owners of the land. We do not know who the first person was who was buried there. Two young daughters of Judge George were back to him. Remember, he's our guy who made the affidavit in 1891, who lived as a neighbor to Henry in 1860 census. Two of his young daughters who died in 1859 are said to be buried in that cemetery. So we do know that anyone who migrated to Missouri prior to the 1860 census could be buried there, but not known to us today. It's also possible, and it's actually very likely, that William Gann, who is Henry's brother, is also buried there. William Gann is said to have died in 1862, and that Henry administered his estate. And we do know it is common for brothers to administer each other's estates, the survivor to administer. That information came to the Gann Society in 1996 from a descendant of George Gann, who was given that information from a granddaughter of Judge George. If the granddaughter ever said how she came by the information, it was not passed along to the society. Now, we know it was common for a brother to administer a deceased brother's estate, but what we don't know are the particulars of the administration because the original case files either no longer exist or access to them has been completely denied. There are 2 index probates associated with Henry's name in the courthouse in Jefferson City and at the archives. And in both locations, the courthouse and the archives, the microfiche that correspond to those images are missing or they are misfiled. One is numbered 671-85 and the other is numbered 895-83. The latter higher number is almost certainly associated with the probate of Henry's estate that Annie did in 1877. By the interval of 224 probates between the 2 numbers, it could be possible that the lower numbered record represents William's said 1862 probated estate. But I'm not confident that we're ever going to know for sure. Consequently, all we have is hearsay of hearsay of hearsay handed down that establishes William's death as 1862. But an 1862 probate could indicate an 1861 death if the probate occurred early in the year. The LDS filmed the probate records of Cole County in the 1970s, and the probate record was not filmed at that time. So perhaps the original case file was already missing, or it could qualify as one of the known issues that surface from time to time with early made microfilms. No one has been able to answer for me what year the index was created that corresponds to the courthouse and archives held microfiche that are missing. I was not able to see any original indexes when I visited there this past March, and I was not even given an answer to whether the original indexes even still exist. I cannot tell if the courthouse personnel and the archivist are evading answering the question, or whether they just simply don't know. It is possible they exist and could be lost. Both of the archivists that I spoke to were relatively new. One had been there a year. I'm not sure she was fully acquainted and with the holdings. I just don't know. There are just so many unanswered questions. It was a very frustrating trip to go on, and not to be and when I had specific information and not to be able to locate that information.